backwards so we can. So, hello everyone. Welcome. Glad you're here for our August STC Florida chapter meeting, our summit recap, also known as Washlines, which I know for some folks who are new to our community, you probably don't know as much about what that is, but we'll explain it as we go forward. Just to quickly go over our agenda, we had our lovely networking session. Thank you to everyone who joined early so we could chat about TechCom, internet culture, and Duolingo, as it turned out this time. But always enjoy a chance to chat and hear what's new with people. We'll have a few slides on just going over welcome and announcements. Then we'll be having our presentations, and then we'll have a brief closing. So as we go along, I will do my best to keep my eye on the chat, but I will always be one step behind Julia, who is like the chat wizard. So she'll be there to help if you have questions or to help keep track of those so we can include those in the Q&A. So from the STC Florida chapter, my name is Bethany Aguad. I am the chapter president. I'm glad you're here to join us. We are the Florida chapter of the Society for Technical Communication. You're going to hear STC a lot. I know it's in our backgrounds and it was in all the promos and it's in our slides. So prepare to hear a lot about STC as we're going over the summit. But our chapter specifically is going over, everything that we think is applying to people, not just in Florida, though that's where most of us are based, but beyond. So we're glad to be able to engage with people virtually beyond our borders. Just a few announcements. If you are not a member of our chapter, we would strongly encourage you to consider becoming one. We'll have renewal for next year. So if you are still a member now, but we'd like you to renew for 2024, or if you're not, you can join, and membership is prorated. So it's a lesser cost for the rest of the year. So if you join, you become a member of the Society for Technical Communication, and then you also would select to be a member of the Florida chapter. If that's something you're interested in doing, feel free to send me any questions you have about that or post anything here in the chat. And we'll make sure to connect you. But membership is what makes our organization successful. Many of us have been active members for some years. John is wearing his active membership shirt. Yes, John, thank you for modeling, showing his level of commitment, not just to STC, but specifically to our community. Part of that is through our volunteer roles. So I want to thank everyone who has been part of our group. I won't go through everyone who has contributed, but we recently had our leadership retreat last month where a lot of people gathered to volunteer for the chapter, talk about projects, things you want to do. And we're always here to help you do what you need to take the next steps in your career. We can't ever give you any guarantees, but we can do our best to help. I also want to note about memo to members. We have been going through a couple of website issues, which are on me, but Julia is ready to start sharing additional content. So Julia, I didn't know if you wanted to give the usual pitch.
Hey everyone, I'm Julia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Vice President, Communications Chair, and Newsletter Editor. If you want to write something, I'd love to publish you. It's a good resume item. You can put it on LinkedIn. It's a good conversation starter. You can email me to let me know what your ideas are or to submit something. And as soon as I'm able to get to the back end of our site, I will be publishing a lot of things because I owe you guys some articles. Also, I'm putting stuff in chat for you on this.
Thanks, Julia. And Julia is always great to work with on sharing articles. A couple of other updates. We do now have a LinkedIn page. I want to especially thank Joy and Julia for helping create that and move that forward as another way to have visibility into our events. So if you are not following our LinkedIn page, we would love it if you would. We're going to be trying to do that more consistently. And again, thanks to Julia and Joy for moving that forward and being a great social media presence. We also have our Discord server. So we've started hosting some events there. We've done some Dungeons and Dragons, we've done some networking, and then we just have some channels for chatting. So if you're looking to engage between meetings or for some of our networking sessions, we encourage you to join. Anyone's welcome to be a part of it. We have some chats there. Nicole shares information about employment and opportunities with that, which you'll hear a little bit about on the slides, but also wanted to make sure that you guys know that that's available. So I won't go too much into it, but just wanted you to know that's a new thing we are offering as of this summer. And if you have feedback, we are always open to it. Okay. I think I might be cutting off just the bottom of my slide, so apologies if that's the case. I might have made my text too big, so I'll read that last little bit. A couple of upcoming events. We have our virtual networking, which we do monthly. Julie and I host those. The next one will be on September 12th at 7:30 on Discord. No RSVP for that. You just show up and click the link to join. We will, of course, send out reminder emails. We also have our ADCO or Administrative Council meetings. So if you are looking to get more involved as a volunteer, or if you're contributing and want to be up to date on what's happening with the chapter, our Administrative Council meetings are open to everyone. I promise we're friendly. And we meet on Zoom. Next one will be September 14th at 7:30, and I'll send out some information about that. If you're interested in any of that and you're not already on our list, please do let me know. You're always welcome to email me at stcbethany@gmail.com. And then a note that we have our chapter meeting. The next one will be September 21st. We're planning to have a presentation on inclusive editing, which I think you'll hear a little bit about tonight coming up in one of the presentations. So looking forward to sharing more details as we move forward there. And also thanks to Julia, who is our intrepid vice president, who is, helping organize all of these events. So I put together this little slide, but I know, Julia, if you wanted to share a little bit about where this chapter calendar comes from.
This comes from a spreadsheet I made, I believe, last year before the leadership retreat for 2022-2023. And this is the update for 2023-2024. There is a typo on that slide and it is okay.
Sorry,
it's
that's
okay.
It is a range of now to now. I live in the present when I'm making slides. Sorry, Julia.
It's okay. This is our plan for the calendar year, for the chapter calendar year, excuse me. Things may change, but we're hoping to keep it as we have listed on this slide. Bethany, you're on mute.
Had to happen. All right. Yeah. Thank you, Julia, for putting this calendar together, and everyone who came to the leadership retreat contributed ideas for programs we could host this year. So I have a slide from Nicole Lindquist, who is our employment chair. She wanted to have a little promo here. So if you need a job or you need to fill a job, she is here to help you. I know she put us, and of course our community is, but specifically I know she is working to proactively engage with members who need jobs or who have positions they need to fill. So if you are in either of those positions, please do email Nicole. She has been doing an awesome job at bringing kind of this whole approach to employment together for our community. And I know she posts regular opportunities on LinkedIn, and she shares things on Discord and also by email. And she's planning some additional programming in the coming months that I'll be sharing for people who are looking for employment or who are going to be looking for employment in the not too distant future. So please do feel free to reach out to Nicole. She's a great person to be in touch with. All right, so I know we had a little bit about Washlines. So this was mentioned in our promos, and I want to share a little bit about kind of a little bit of STC Florida history. So it was a tradition the chapter had for many years, where after the STC Summit, or international conference, members who had attended would bring back the knowledge and information they had gathered and share it with the members who were not able to join. So originally, this was a panel of different presenters, and there would be a physical wash line with little signs hung on clothespins above to indicate which presentations they would be covering. So it was a literal wash line as part of the theming for the event. Dan Voss was very proud of this event and hosted it for many, many years. Now we are virtual. I'm sorry I did not make a physical wash line to hang behind me. I didn't think my cats would be terribly keen on that and would be a little disruptive. But now we're kind of taking it virtually. So I want to thank everyone who went to Summit, who's going to be one of our presenters tonight, who are taking the time to share their knowledge in our virtual Washlines presentation. Also, just wanted to share a little bit about the STC Summit, since I assume everyone's at least familiar with it enough to be here. But just to recap what it is, so this took place in Atlanta this year on May 14th through 17th. It's an annual event held in different cities around the US. And it's sort of the TechCom event. So it's where we gather with our colleagues from around the world to go to educational sessions and to network. And it's really a place for like-minded people. It's the only place you'll go where everyone who goes out to dinner talks about the font that was chosen for the menu and notices a spelling error and has to deliberate about what to do about that. And I think that's one of the joys of finding your people. but it's a great event to go to. And for those of us who are pretty connected with people in other STC communities, it's a great way to get to see people in person, in addition to the actual professional networking and development pieces. Just a little note, this year STC was celebrating their 70th anniversary at Summit. This is a picture I stole from John, that John took, pointing to a picture of John pointing to a sign. It was a meta picture of John celebrating an award he received for being an outstanding volunteer and member. They actually had a whole display at Summit with artifacts from different eras of STC. So programs from events, photos from past summits, and John made the board. So in the history, 70 years of STC, John made it onto the board. It was nice to get to see that there. So for those who don't know, STC was originally two different organizations that were formed separately in 1953, and then they merged in 1957 to form the Society of Technical Writers and Editors. Then they merged with the Publishing Society a few years later, and then in 71 actually became the Society for Technical Communication. So it's been celebrated since 1953, hence the 70 years. But officially STC as the name of the organization since 1971. So generations of STC members come before you, as part of technical communicators. And while our work changes a lot in how we do things, I think the core principles have remained the same. And just a little note, the first summit for STC was held in 1953. I thought this was an interesting picture that definitely harkens back to a different time before I think most of us can remember and what it was like to be out at a conference. So that was the first event, but since then, STC has had a reputation for being the TechCom destination. It's where I know I go have learned about industry trends, because sometimes when you're on the job, you learn about what you do at your job, but it's a great way to broaden and deepen your TechCom knowledge. And also, like I said, it's a lot of fun. So just a little bit for those who haven't seen about what STC is like today. This was some of us who have gone, and you go to events, you network with people, you talk more than you've ever talked in your life, especially for those of us who are introverts. And it's great to get to connect and see people and learn, and you don't get graded, so it's better than school. So just a quick note, I'm not going to stop bragging on Alex, who couldn't be here tonight, but Alex is one of our esteemed chapter members who became an associate fellow, which is one of the highest honors in STC. And I asked if he could put together a little slide just as an example. So if you are looking to find a way to move through your career and beyond your actual jobs, progress as a representative of your field. So being an associate fellow means that you're not just a great STC member, you're a great technical communicator. So I thought it would be helpful to show a little bit about some of the steps that Alex took, his career progression, and also his STC involvement. So Alex started as an FTC treasurer. So I know we have a lot of FTC members starting on the UCF club side. And then he was the FTC president, worked his way through mentorship co-chair. I know we have a few folks here who have co-chaired the mentoring program at different times. It's a great role to be in, to get involved and to help connect with other members. And then from there, I think Alex said at one point, he's like, yeah, I think I've held pretty much every position available in the Florida chapter at different times, from treasurer president to media staff president. I think the only one was not vice president. Alex was also really involved in the community affairs committee, which I know you'll be hearing more about from John as he moves forward with his presentation. And most recently, Alex was the vice chair or co-chair of the community affairs committee. He's also worked for Lockheed Martin, where he started as proposal writer or proposal editor in 2011. And then he's been consistently promoted to different teams and parts of the organization. And most recently, he was promoted to being a technical publications lead, which is something that means that you're not only hardworking, but you're talented and respected by everyone you work with, which I would certainly think is something I could say about Alex. So he just wanted to encourage everyone to, put the time in, and if that's something you're looking for, that kind of recognition, but you get in what you take out of it. Or did I say that backwards? You get out what you put in, and that it's about intentionality. So again, I know Alex isn't here, but I'm bragging on him anyways, because I'm very proud, because he worked hard, and it was great to see him be recognized in front of his peers from around the world, as he was at that event. He also was doing, sorry, the classic pointing at the board thing. It's a time honored tradition. If you receive an award at Summit, you must pose next to the board pointing to your name. I don't make that rule. That's just how it has to be. So I also wanted to, introduce you to our presenters. I got this picture, I think it was from John, taken at Summit. I thought it was a delightful one of our presenters who are going to be covering things. So this was in the lobby at the Hyatt Regency. Yeah, John has pointed out it's his squad that was included. So I know you guys had a good time, and I'm glad that you're taking the time to be part of our presentation. Right, and Dominic said in the chat, the John Tourage. The John Tourage, extends beyond the Summit experience. So yeah, thank you guys for being here. So Jasmine, Chantal, Delaney, Dominic, and John are going to be my co-presenters as we're covering some different presentations from the Summit. And thank them. I want to thank them all for putting together presentations and bringing them back to share with us. So just a quick overview on the presentations being covered. I am discussing making the business case for documentation. Jasmine's doing testing well, ensuring validity and reliability of documentation. Dominic's is practical sketching for technical communicators. John, community leadership information exchange. Chantal is inclusive tech editing. Delaney is creating a sense of belonging and engaging the virtual workforce. So we're each recapping a presentation that we attended at Summit that we felt gave us something useful to take away that we want to bring back to share to you. So I think without further ado, I'm realizing I should not have put myself first because it means you've had to listen to me talk for a while, but I promise I'm going to be handing it off very soon and you'll get to hear from one of our other presenters. But for now, I'm glad to be sharing with you about making the business case for documentation that was presented originally by Katie Cronkite. So I'm going to be recapping her slides, the information she shared. It was something I really enjoyed. And I think it's something that is one of the, probably a struggle for technical communicators. So her particular covering for this event was her insights as a CEO. So she runs her own firm that works on technical documentation and communication projects. So essentially, organizations come to her when they need work done and they contract them to complete that work. And she has people with different technical writing skills that work on those projects. So she knows that it's probably not natural for a lot of us to make a business case. We tend to focus on the work itself and less on the maybe more persuasive elements. And she really did a great job breaking down the specifics of how to make a case to leadership for the value of technical communication and documentation, instead of just saying, well, it's very important and it's necessary, but to really be able to quantify that and make a compelling argument for why that's something that not just that we want to do, but that we need to do, and the failure to do so is costing us money. So Katie was a great presenter. She is the CEO of Good Words LLC, so managing a whole bunch of different projects. She shared a lot of really good stories about different organizations they worked with and those experiences and the sort of arguments that they found useful. And overall, I thought she did a great job at something I know I struggle with in technical writing, which is not just doing the work, but making the case for the work itself. It's something you'll probably hear about, especially for those who have been in the profession for a long time, that learning to be advocates for what we do is something that is really necessary as we move forward in our careers. So here's what she kind of broke down. I thought these were the key points. The number one was to think like an executive, which is not, I think, natural for, at least for myself as a technical writer. I tend to think about, well, what's the end user going to be for this documentation? How are they going to receive it? How is it going to help their, life, job, tasks, etc. But in this case, you're trying to think about how documentation serves the personal goals of whoever is going to make the decision to invest in technical documentation. So if they have projects they're trying to achieve, numbers they're trying to target, or if they're just trying to pursue, any sort of personal project where they want to solve particular problems, the more you can learn about them and tailor your pitch to that person, the more likely you are to be successful. So it's really audience analysis, similar to what we do when we're creating documentation for end users, but instead you're thinking about who you are providing this information and presentation to. She also said that you should research company goals. So not just necessarily the corporate values, but if there's particular like large contracts they're pursuing, or if they're going to be going through a merger or something like that, something that's large scale, anything that will do to make that process go smoother and alleviate pain points and save costs is something worth improving. one thing that she included there also, check the bottom line about how leadership is compensated for success. That is something that I would never have thought about, but she pointed out that specifically anything you can learn about like the actual financial targets. A lot of executives get compensated specifically for hitting particular goals. So if they can cut costs by a certain amount or come in ahead of schedule on certain tasks, they will be rewarded for that. So if you can show that investing in documentation will help them achieve that and they'll personally benefit, it makes it much easier to get their buy-in, because you're not asking them to feel that documentation is just inherently valuable, but you're actually, showing the dollars behind it that they will get to reap themselves. From that sort of like pitch piece, she then got into how do you figure out these numbers? Because that's something I think I know I would struggle with. How do you say, well, what is the impact? And she had this wonderful documentation impact calculator where she had worked on a series of formulas for specific things, whether it was lack of documentation causing problems or how documentation would benefit the organization. So that was often based on calculating costs based on time wasted by having poor documentation or lost sales. If it's an organization that like needs to sell their software and they were finding that they weren't closing deals, and especially if the feedback was, well, we don't want to buy the software application if it doesn't have a high quality user guide. That's a direct cost to that organization. If they cannot close a sale, then they are not making that money. So from there, the impact documentation impact calculator would show, okay, here's what it would cost to fix that. So that would include how much it costs to hire for her, of course, for her company, what their staff, but the cost of a technical writer or editor or people with additional skill sets if it was like an API documentation issue. And then she said, ideally, showing that the cost of hiring people to do it right is less than the money they're losing by having it not done well or not done at all. She said, of course, sometimes you would find that overall, maybe it wasn't a huge benefit, but more often than not, it would be much cheaper for them to invest in good documentation up front and some additional money to maintain it than it was to actually just continue to fail by not having documents that address critical gaps. So from there was putting all of that together into a business proposal that would communicate, here's where the pain points are, here are the struggles, here's how we can address it, and here's the value, bringing that all into one document. So she had a whole list of questions you can ask. I won't read off all of them, but I thought they were really useful and they kind of tie back to those key points I was talking about. So especially about like how to tie to the company's charter, how does the lack of documentation undermine them, and how can it help the company achieve their specific goals. So she said that answering these questions she felt was really critical to having a successful proposal. Not that you can't make an argument without all this information, but the better information you have, the better you can explain exactly what needs to be done and why it will be valuable to the organization so that it's a much easier decision. People don't buy documentation because they're excited and dazzled by the prospect of just having it. Unfortunately, as much as we love documentation, most of the world doesn't find it inherently thrilling. So it needs to be practical, pragmatic, and not leave you questioning about whether you're making a good decision. So I thought these were all really good questions, some of which I would never have occurred to me to ask when preparing such a proposal, especially focusing on how to tailor it to a specific stakeholder, and additionally focusing on lack of productivity for internal employees by having poor or incomplete documentation. And then last but certainly not least, I mentioned the documentation impact calculator. This is the sort of what the Excel spreadsheet looked like, and she was willing to share it if you would just email her later and say, hello, I'm really interested, and she would send it and it had all these magical formulas. It's a wonderful spreadsheet. I can give you your contact information if you are interested in it, or if you find yourself in a position where you need to make the case for documentation and put numbers behind it. But you can see she breaks it out by how much does it cost your organization to, have your engineers spend their time supporting people to answer the same questions over and over again. It's much cheaper to pay a tech writer to write a really good standard operating procedure than it is to have an expensive engineer explain it live to a human being over and over again. So lots of different pieces there about what the issues would be, and then calculating based on average salaries for those roles, what the time cost is leading to in dollars. So Really, I thought it was incredibly insightful and helpful, and broke it down into this really practical approach so that you could quantify what the savings would be initially and also over time. Because of course it's exciting to save money this year, but it's even more exciting to save money increasingly over time as you have invested early on in your documentation and some money to maintain it. So without further ado, the summary, I chose this because I thought she did, I read her some event description, and I thought she did a great job explaining that she was going to walk you through in a very practical way how to do this, not just general buzzwords, but step by step, how she approaches this, what things she thinks are critical, important, and how we can demonstrate the value of our work. I've talked to many technical communicators, and I've also been the person feeling like our work is undervalued and struggled with how to connect that pain point with a solution besides just telling people our work is valuable. So I think it's a struggle that I know I personally have had, and I thought she did a great job just saying, here are the tools you need. You need to ask the right questions. You need to prepare the right sort of proposal. You need to calculate it correctly. And then there's still no guarantees, but it's something that's available. So for me, what I learned, it's really about asking the right questions to produce a productive discussion. So if you're meeting with a stakeholder who's going to make a decision documentation, whether you're an external or internal person, you need to ask them what you need to know, because they probably won't inherently think about telling you about their personal goals and and what their organization is trying to complete. They're going to think about the specific problem, but you need broader information. And then from there, it's about doing the legwork to make those calculations for the organizational impact. And overall, your goal is to make it an easy decision for stakeholders. So I think that was all for my slides. I thought it was a really great presentation. It's probably corny to say I was inspired by it, but I was, and it made me feel encouraged about the level of agency I could have in the field. So I think without further ado, I'm handing it off to Jasmine. Am I sharing your slides, Jasmine?
It's on the same presentation.
Okay. All right.
I will be presenting one of many presentations that I enjoyed at the summit. This one is Testing Well, Ensuring Validity and Reliability in Documentation by Rachel Graham. A little bit about the presentation. Testing your documentation has several benefits. Foremost, it ensures validity, accomplishing the intended results, and reliability, producing the same results across different users and settings. Additionally, testing your documentation gives you the opportunity to feel the true user experience, detect bugs, and decrease costs. You don't always have the time or the resources to test with users, but testing your own documentation as if you are a user in the same environment as your user would allows you to get some of the same benefits and improve your documentation. In this presentation, Rachel Graham walks through the process of testing your documentation, including how to prepare, how to test, and what to do with the results. A little bit about the presenter, Rachel Graham. She is a technical writer and content developer at Solo.io, which provides a platform for integrating cloud native and open source technologies into a unified application. Graham basically went over 3 key points or parts to testing. The first is preparing. She said, never simply just jump right into testing. You should put thought into the who, when, with what, and where of your test. Second, she goes over actually testing. She details 5 steps on how to test, and she demonstrates a lot of questions that you should ask yourself during those phases of testing. And lastly is using your results. She provides a few examples of what to do with certain results from your tests. First, how to prepare. Who? This can be just you and another writer, or you and an SME. I also don't think there's any harm in testing with a friend or family member, especially if they might represent a user. Next is when. You can test when it works best for you. This can be during the development cycle, peer writer reviews, or routine doc checks. With what, it is important to use the same product and or tool as a real user would. It's also helpful to keep drafts or notes open as you conduct the test. And finally is where. Test in the same environment as your user or as closely as possible. Prepare to test in multiple environments if your product calls for it. How to test. Graham proposes several different questions to ask in these 5 stages. First is set up the environment. Look at your tools and resources. What tools or resources would the user have in their environment? Are there necessary tools that users might not know that they need? Next is extra tools. Do you have any extra tools you might have forgotten about that would help users? And then there is prior knowledge. Do you have prior knowledge that helps you understand what the steps do? Is it knowledge that a user would or wouldn't have? Next is follow steps exactly. Are you walking through and taking steps exactly, or are you taking shortcuts or side steps that the user wouldn't be able to use or wouldn't know about? Next is mental decisions. Are you making mental decisions at any point before proceeding to the next step? And then finally is tweaks. Are you making any small tweaks to your environment to complete a step? The third part of testing is noting curiosity. Did you wonder why something happened or why you didn't need to complete a certain step? Checkpoints. Did you feel like you needed a break or to stop and take stock of your work at any point? And continuity. Did any breaks or jumps between steps or sections feel jarring or incongruous? Next is verify results. Validate. How do you determine whether the results are correct? Troubleshoot. If something goes wrong, how do you know which component is not working? And once you determine that, how do you fix it? And then next steps. Do you know how the results of this process fit in with the rest of the product components? Last is repeat in varied environments. Can you follow the same steps in a slightly different environment? What other environments would your tool or product be used in? Can a coworker or other test user follow the same steps and get the same results? And differences. If you get different results, are they valid, or do you need restrictions to ensure the same results across environments? Using the results. Using the results is the most important part of the test. It's the reason you test it. The following are examples that Graham gave for results and making changes. One example result is tweaks the steps required in different environments. A possible change is add prerequisite tips or branching steps for each environment. Another possible result from testing is something broke, but you figured out how to fix it. You can make a change by adding verification and troubleshooting checks. Another result is something broke, but you don't know how to fix it. You can ask the SMEs, file a bug report or feature request. And if you're unclear why something happened, you can add explanations within steps or an understanding what happened section. In summary, at the end of Graham's presentation, she conducted a quick demo test. There were 2 things that I personally noted. First is having Graham's detailed list of testing steps help bring focus to the test. And second was, it is important to take thorough notes or directly edit a draft as you work through the test. Graham actually had VS Code up as she did her demo. So she was actually making edits in the HTML code as she was going through the demo. I personally would probably have track changes on my edit, but otherwise I found that very helpful. In summary, Rachel Graham's presentation on testing while ensuring validity and reliability in documentation provides thorough steps for testing your own documentation while testing with a real user is always helpful. You can still significantly benefit and improve your documentation by effectively setting up your own test. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jasmine. That was a great recap. I did not attend that one, so now I wish I had, but I don't have to because you covered it for me. So thank you so much. I think next I am handing it to Dominic. Let me hand the screen sharing over to you. You are on mute, but you should be able to screen share.
Okay, no, it shouldn't be on anymore.
If you have questions along the way, we are planning to do some Q&A. So feel free, if you put something in the chat, we'll keep an eye on it and make sure to pull that up at the end.
Can you all see? Okay. So, hello, I'm Dominic Shivari, and I will be recapping Practical Sketching for Technical Communicators by Elizabeth Alley. Now, this was one that doesn't necessarily have to do with any form of documentation, so much as it is a practice for learning how to streamline your thoughts when you have a lot of information to sort through. And I thought this was really interesting because I often get confused when I have a lot of information. And as someone who likes sketching on my own time, as I mentioned earlier before the call actually started, I am a bit of an artist myself. And anytime I can incorporate art into my progress, I jump at it. So this is one that I enjoyed very much so. So I'll just go through the table of contents really quick. We have a quick introduction that I'll read to you, then a quick video from Allie herself. Then a few key points, which are the following, which is drawing aids thinking, creating a visual dictionary, additional information, then a summary, and thank you. So, practical doodling. Have you ever found yourself, hold on. Have you ever found yourself doodling on your notes when you've either been bored or confused? I am too. This is actually a good thing. When your words fail to aid your understanding, visual representations of the concept you're trying to understand may jog your brain. Drawing helps by allowing for creativity in the thought process and by sorting out irrelevant information. This allows you to then create a draft of your notes that you can successively refine. As we'll see in the following slides, you can incorporate practical sketching into your notes by creating, a personal visual alphabet of simple childlike drawings. Oh, hold on. There we go. So yes, Elizabeth Alley, this is a drawing she did of herself. And she has over a decade of CPTC certification. She's created art for the past 25 years, and she has experience in both IT and project management, among other things. So this was a pamphlet she handed out during the session. I have mine. I don't know where I put it, but essentially she goes over here as well. Oops, hold on. And the style she incorporates there, I will get into it soon because it's very simple. And it's actually an important part. The style of the drawings are actually quite an important part of this practical sketching for note-taking. So, yep, as I mentioned before, the three key points are drawing aids thinking, creating a visual dictionary is good, and some other additional information to take away from this. So, drawing aids thinking. We often capture info from a variety of sources and we can't process all of it. Doodling triggers thinking because it allows you to translate specific information to basic shapes that represent specific words or ideas. Doodling also helps organize your thoughts or anchoring them if ever you have a mental block, and then discarding relevant information. Basically, when you're doodling, see, when you communicate with words, you're thinking in a linear fashion, you're reading out the words one by one, not always. You can't always understand what they're saying just because there's so much information being thrown at you. But when it comes to drawing, your brain necessarily has to translate a specific concept into a specific image that that's basically immutable. You cannot change it into a different concept. And the great thing about it is, and we'll get to this a little more, it's about creativity. It comes from your own experience. This is not meant for anyone else to see necessarily. It's just to aid you in note-taking. And the great thing about that is that it can all be personalized. However you choose to draw to help you understand, all the better. And the way you do that is by creating a visual dictionary. Elizabeth Alley herself calls it a visual alphabet, although I think dictionary is more accurate because it doesn't have to be necessarily alphabetical. The images themselves don't correspond to a letter of the alphabet, and you can order them in any way you want. It's all about how you organize it for yourself. So when you're drawing these things, again, you want to take it from your own experience. And this is an example of something I've done myself. I didn't make very many, as you can see. But for example, if I wanted to proofread something, I have a little book with a magnifying glass and a letter. For internet, it's pretty simple. It's pretty similar to a lot of other modern depictions of internet, a computer with a basic globe connected to it. And for the two languages that I know, English and Italian, I drew them other countries, and then I just put the letters next to it. And when you draw these things, instead of writing a bunch of words down, if you wanted to, you could connect them in a flow chart. You could see how they flow. You can practice them, and you definitely have to practice them because the more you do it, the better you get at being able to draw these things. And some additional information is doodling is, and think about this, it might seem just like doodling and drawing to aid your understanding, but when you think about it, drawing in general is a cruder form of data visualization, because you can still draw a flowchart and then amend it later on an actual presentation. And as Elizabeth states, when you create drafts of your notes, it's similar to early versions of a painting. And when you include a visual component like this, it makes it even more so. Something else she brought up during the presentation is that most adults are undiagnosed ADHDs, and drawing can help you keep focused. When there's so much information come at you in the form of written language, it can sometimes be confusing. Although, as I mentioned earlier, having drawings can help ground your thoughts. And one other thing that Allie brings up is when you draw these things, you need to draw like a child would, because you're not here to make a Picasso or any of the other things. You're trying to draw in as simple a manner as you can understand that helps you. Because the goal here is not to make art. The goal is to visually depict a concept. So yeah, take the art out of sketching is her main point here. What I learned from this, I love this one. I love this session because sometimes words alone can help us understand ideas and concepts. As someone who likes to draw and appreciates graphics in documents, I believe that our thought process can be streamlined by incorporating a visual component to our nonverbal communication. And in the end, I learned that using visual alphabet effectively can help. Sorry, what? I apologize. Yeah. So yeah, what I learned is create a visual alphabet to represent the recurring objects in your world, and learn to use it effectively by keeping the design simple and through practice. And then practice drawing when you're overwhelmed with information. And that's the end.
See the applause coming along. Thank you, Dominic. I attended one of her sessions a few years ago, and I think she's refined it since then. So thank you for passing on that information and sharing that with us, and for sharing your drawings. So I believe up next we have John Clement sharing some slides on the Community Affairs Committee. Also some slides that were contributed by Lori Myers, who could not be with us tonight, who is the outgoing Community Affairs Committee chair. But John has been willing to present them on Lori's behalf. So John, is it good if I go ahead and advance the slides?
Yep, all good. And so, yes, I'm happy to be able to talk about the Community Affairs Committee and the role it played during the meetings it put on during the STC Summit. And yeah, since Lori can't be here tonight, she passed on some of the slides about the Community Affairs Committee, which I'll be talking a little bit about before I go into my specific piece that I was able to talk about during the summit. And so yeah, overall, the Community Affairs Committee put on 2 meetings during the STC Summit. And just as a high-level view, for anyone who's unfamiliar with the committee, STC as a national organization has several different volunteer groups that support different areas in STC. One of them is the Community Affairs Committee, which supports chapter leaders and communities throughout STC with resources, information, answering questions, giving leadership advice and tips, things like that. And so the 2 meetings that happened during the summit, the first one was about just about the CAC and resources it provided. It was an information exchange, and that's one that I was able to do a bit of a presentation on, and Lori also gave an excellent presentation during it, as well as the rest of the CAC members. And the second meeting was a more social one. It was like candy being passed around and a fun time, flashlights, celebrating STC's 70-year anniversary, just celebrating STC communities, also with a speech by Lori about just her time as an STC member. So lots of great things that the CAC put on. And yep, so here's just a recap of the Community Affairs Committee and the members from this year. Lori was the chair of the committee. And alongside her, there was myself, who helped with student engagement on the CAC, Sharon Ford on leadership succession, social media, Jamie Sagan, webinars and programs, Aaron Galilee, STC staff, director of membership community relations, and Lucy the cat, the mascot, who is Lori's amazing and very cute cat, who is definitely a great mascot for the committee. And so, yeah, I won't be recapping all the sessions. I'm just going to be honing into mine, but here's just an overview of what was kind of discussed at that first Community Affairs Committee meeting during the summit, when it was an information exchange. So CAC leaders talking about, here are some things you can do to, develop yourself as a leader or help your community grow, do outreach to people, or even just build up a leadership team, things like that. The first one was presented by Sharon, and it was about developing and managing value-adding programs. So each of the 3 sessions kind of went in a progression, and starting off the base was, if you want to have a successful group or chapter, where do you start? And you start with the ideas, the meetings, what content you want to put out into the community. And so Sharon did an excellent presentation on that. And then next slide. Thank you. And so the next thing that Sharon talked about, for example, some of her idea overviews were starting with program ideas, thinking about program formats next, and then thinking of, well, there are some more suggestions, like where places to get ideas from, tie in STC webinars, online classes, invite people to different STC groups or take ideas from those groups as inspiration, and lots of ideas on, how do you build up meeting ideas and how do you put on those meetings? So that's a little overview of what the first mini presentation was from the CAC. And then the second session, I'll just overview it and dive more into it later. I talked about just communicating and engaging with members, which pretty much after laying the foundation of, okay, now you're a chapter leader, you've helped your chapter build up meeting ideas and programming, you have all these things, these meetings that you want to host. What now? You want to get the people there, you want to build up a community. And so I talked about both from advice I've heard from others and experiences with myself of just, ways to do outreach, ways to get members and ways to keep members staying by just building up a community that both has good content in it, but also, that feeling of inclusiveness, that feeling of staying power, being able to reach out to members, giving them things that they want, they need in their careers, things like that. So just a little overview here, and I'll be hopping back into it soon. And then the last of the 3 mini sessions was from Jamie about recruiting and engaging with volunteers. So the foundation is there with the meetings. Next step, you do outreach, you build up a community. And then the next step, if you want a really strong community or a team to be built up, or chapter to be built up, is to create a volunteer group and recruit volunteers, keep them in for the long haul. Because the best thing that someone who's invested in a chapter, for example, or so long as they have the time and resources, can do is to learn about the opportunities to give back, whether it be in a small or a big way. Because it's not just about, the work that you can put in as a volunteer, it's about, being part of something bigger in a way. And Jamie talked a lot about that and the values of volunteering and how it all kind of ties into growing a chapter. And so, yeah, just here are some examples of questions that were given at the meeting. Like, when you're engaging with volunteers, what do you need? Who's going to do it? What's in for me as a volunteer? Just good questions to ask when you're kind of doing the recruitment process. And then, yep, as I described, so all of that was for the first meeting that the CAC did. And I believe it was, so yeah, that was the first session. And then the second session that the CAC did was the networking social. So celebrating 7 years of STC, flashlights, candies, and lots of great times. And some Q&A for the crowd with Lucy the cat. Lucy didn't make an appearance at the summit itself, but of course, as our mascot, Lori represented her. And during virtual calls, you'll probably see if Lori's there, Lucy's also probably there. Should be very cute. And we just talked a little bit about, who's been at STC the longest, but STC memories, really just having fun with each other. And yes, The Value of Community, The Story of Gratitude by Lori Meyer. So during the networking session, Lori gave just a really fantastic presentation about her time as an STC member. And she, many who have been able to even talk with Loy for a little bit just can tell how much experience she has in STC, and also just how long she's been in STC, how many communities she's been part of, because she not only loves the field and the community, but just, being part of and helping others, being part of other communities and helping others. And it really shines through on everything that she does. So she kind of did a retrospective on her time in STC. One funny thing I remember her mentioning, and she does mention this, if you asked her to be a leader way back then, she would have said no. And now she's been leader in so many different areas. But it was a really great way to end off the CAC presentations. All right, and now just a little bit on my sections. And I talked about it a little bit earlier, so the information's up there. And I'm just gonna kind of give a deeper look into, not all the way deep since lots of text and the actual meeting itself, or the meeting itself at the summit was longer. But I'll just do an overview again of kind of some topics I talked about during my mini presentation. So yeah, during the information exchange, I talked about the outreach process, and it's something that in the CAC, my role is student outreach director. So where the other leaders focus on things like just like directly helping the leaders for the main STC chapters, a large part of my work is reaching out to student chapters in STC, so student leaders and chapters at universities, just helping them grow their own communities. Kind of like how UCF has FTC, which is kind of like an unofficial STC student chapter, just a group at UCF for technical communicators. There's different groups just like it, official STC organizations that are student groups in different universities. And so that's some of the work I do, kind of led me to put some of this information together, but also just not just how it applies to students, but how it applies to doing outreach and building up chapters as a whole. And so, yeah, one of the main questions I tackled was, how can communities best invest in new and existing members? Because you need members to grow and for a chapter to stay alive. And so some of the things I tackled were, the next slide, please. Yes, communication was one of them, because you can have as many good programs, as many great resources as you have or as you want, but if you don't tell anybody about it, the chances of them getting traction, not the best. It's not looking. It doesn't look like you will have new members if you only stick to who you have already. And the better outlook is to always be seeking just to grow, always be seeking to put yourself out there, encouraging your volunteers and your leaders to put themselves out there too, and making sure that new members, when they join, they feel welcome, that they're not just an attendee at a meeting or a seat in a chair, or sitting in a chair or a face on a screen, that they, you give them a welcome, you ask them what they're interested in, you ask them, what background they're coming from, whether in tech comm or otherwise, and just helping, being a listener to them, making sure that they're not just in your community, but part of your community. And so communication is a big part of that. You want to make sure that your fulfilling programming is communicated well. You do outreach, you create a digital presence, like different social media platforms, even asynchronous ways like sending out emails, creating a Discord, things like that, where making sure you're reaching as many people as possible, the quantity side of it. And then of course there's the quality side of it, the points like being welcoming, listening to needs, providing programming that meets those needs. So when it comes to communication, definitely focus on quality and quantity. And that's how you get members to come in and also stay. And next slide, please. And then the second half of my presentation was about engaging new members. So there's the communication aspect, making sure you communicate a lot and you communicate well. But then engaging new members, part of that is the follow-up, acting on that listening, making sure members feel seen, taking the next step, which is volunteering and joining a leadership team, helping members know the value of staying connected, make sure that, if they're attending lots of meetings, just letting them know, if you're attending and not a member yet, you should be a member. Or, if you're attending a lot and thinking, I want to expand my skills, you should be a volunteer. Or even if you just want a way to give back, just telling them the value of staying connected. And it's a two-way street too, which is a great thing to communicate to, members that you want to stay in the community. And remaining sensitive for possible reasons for not renewing, because everyone has different availabilities, or just just time wise or financial wise, anything like that, or even just if they're dipping their toe into TechCom or STC. Just never pressure anybody, but definitely leave the door open. Always be welcoming and letting them know whenever you want to get connected more or just invest in STC, invest in yourself more. We're here, both either as a member or a leader. And in short, evaluate your audience, which is kind of a key thing about TechCom, and it applies to community building as well. And next slide, please. And then here's one thing. Engaging new members is also recognizing member milestones, celebrating members. And this is something that Lori, and I know many others are passionate about, but Lori is always just a cheerleader for people, and she's always just proud to talk about and put on just member recognition for members and leaders in communities that she's in or anywhere that she is. And recognition goes a long way, because if someone gets a new job or a new role or graduates or gets an STC award, it's a great thing to do to highlight their accomplishments. Just like earlier in this meeting, Bethany, how just Alex's accomplishments were highlighted, and got to see him do the point to his board. Like, love to see things like that, and it really just makes the community not only feel more fun, but just make sure that members know that they're valued, which really for anybody is important. You want to make sure that if you're in a group, you feel valued. If you're a member and you've been doing things, you want to feel seen. If you're a member and you've been contributing a lot of things, you want to feel seen in that way too. So definitely recognize your members and just have fun along the way. Make sure that everybody who's putting in work, whether in STC, your leadership team, or outside, you just give them a little nod. And when that happens, they'll know that you're there for them, and they'll want to be there for you too, on the team or in membership. All right, and next slide, please. All right, and the gist of it, yeah, invest in your members because they're the future. Make them feel known, listen, welcome, identify what they want so that you can build up effective meetings and programs based off of that. And take time to connect with members, because at the end of the day, if you're trying to build up a community, whether a full-on STC chapter or a student chapter, or even just any kind of TechCom group, you want to make sure that you know what members want, what they need, know your audience, and then build off of that. And don't be afraid to put yourself out there, because it's a thing that, especially if you're in a leadership position and you're doing outreach. I know for me, like it took me a while to warm up to just doing outreach and everything like that. But then after a good amount of time in, I'm like, yeah, I can send out 5 reminders to people on the same day. They'll be all right. And hey, it's worth it. It's worth it. And at the end of the day, it just shows how, as a leader or just as a leadership team, it shows how much you care about the programs that you're trying to share and just how much you want people to be part of your community. So never be afraid to do outreach, and make sure to listen to the members who are going to be part of your chapter for the long haul. All right, and next slide. And I believe this is the last one. So this is one from Lori, and it's a happy birthday to STC. And she made sure that we celebrated that as a Community Affairs Committee team, and during our meetings during the summit. We shone a light on 7 years of STC. So that was a really fun time. And, just kind of as the whole presentation was talking about, worth it to be an STC, but also just a lot of fun. And it's great to recognize 70 whole years. So great that we're all here being able to celebrate this milestone this year. And I think that is all from my slides.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. You're thinking 70 years. You remember every single one, right?
Oh yeah, gonna hit 71 next year.
All right, and next I think we have Chantal talking about inclusive tech editing.
Okay, hey everyone. My name is Chantal Cyrier, and the presentation, one of the ones that really interested me that I'll be talking about tonight is Inclusive Technical Editing by Dr. Jonathan Arnett. So this presentation focused on making technical communication more inclusive and giving us resources and tips for how to go about doing that, mainly in the editing process. So a bit about the presenter. Dr. Arnett is a professor at Kennesaw State University, where he's the program coordinator for their Bachelor of Science in Technical Communication degree. and he has done a lot of writing and research in various technical communication topics. Next slide, please. So one of the big things we talked about was the misconception that TechCom is neutral. This is a pretty big misconception, and the thought behind it is that we don't need to make efforts to make language more inclusive as technical communicators, because the language that we use day to day is so cut and dry that there is no biases or inequity or other related topics in the language that we use. However, like any other time that we use language, that simply isn't the case. There can be a lot of biases, either subtle or not so subtle. So these are some of the examples that we talked about during the presentation. So one of them comes from the software realm. It's been getting a lot of attention recently, so you probably have heard of it. But master and slave, those were terms that were used since the inception of software. But now we're going more towards main and branch or other similar terms. Another example comes from cybersecurity. So whitelisting and blacklisting. Here, white is being used to denote something good and black something negative. These connotations have no business being here, so what do we use instead? In business, manned and unmanned, very gendered language. And then an example from general TechCom, how do we talk about our users? So in the past, the status quo was just to use he, him pronouns, but what really is the most inclusive way to talk about our users? So next slide. We also talked a lot about the different types of style guides. So I have here the two types of style guides that are most pertinent to the overall main points. So first we have your good old standard style guides. It's what you think of probably when you hear the term style guide. So it's authoritative, it's compiled by an organization, either an outside one, or if your organization is of a certain size, you may have your own company style guide. They are prescriptive. Here are the rules, and here's how you apply them. So this is examples include the AP Style Book and the IEEE Editorial Style Manual. So these style guides, they're great. They have seen us through thick and thin, given us tons of advice and guidance, but they can be outdated, especially on sensitive and rapidly changing topics, which is basically all of inclusion. So to kind of fill in the gaps here, supplemental style guides really come to the rescue. They focus on addressing concerns of historically marginalized populations. So two good examples to start with are the conscious style guide and the diversity style guide. These are two great resources to start with because they are pretty broad. They touch on a lot of different topics in the world of inclusion. However, if there is ever a time where you want to go more in depth on inclusion and how it pertains to one or more historically marginalized populations, then I would definitely recommend looking at a supplemental style guide created by an advocacy organization. Many of these organizations create these, such as the GLAAD Media Reference Guide, and they're great because these advocacy organizations really have their fingers on the pulse of what's happening, inclusivity wise. These can be found by Googling keyword style guide. So next slide. So these supplemental style guides have a lot of commonalities. They will help you avoid biased images in language, stereotypes, and stigmatic language, and they will help you show equity. Next slide. So my main takeaways, TechCom is not neutral. There are many areas where we do need to investigate the status quo and find a new one. Luckily, supplemental style guides help fill in the gaps that our main style guides may have and inform us on inclusive language. And finally, do your homework and do your best. So do your homework, seek out these supplemental style guides and make using them not only a priority in your personal editing, but the editing of your team at large. And also do your best, remain open, curious, inquisitive, and you will be on the road to success. So that's pretty much all I have.
Thank you so much, Chantal. Great recap. It was a really good presentation. And there were some tough questions in the room that I thought he did a great job answering when that came up. So last but certainly not least, we have Delaney talking about a presentation from Ben Wolk.
Hi, my name is Delaney Gunnell, and today I'm going to be recapping Creating a Sense of Belonging, Engaging in the Virtual Workforce by presenter Ben Wolk. While all of us in the technical field have known for a while that the digitization of the workplace is coming, post the COVID-19 pandemic, the idea of working virtually has become mainstream. One of the primary challenges of transitioning to a digital workplace is trying to navigate interpersonal relationships within the office. As a current student who will be going into the workforce post this digital transformation, I was very interested in the topic. In Creating a Sense of Belonging, Engaging the Virtual Workforce, presenter Ben Wolk explains how to build a positive company culture, even when many workers are now digital. So a little bit about the presenter himself. The self-proclaimed introvert leadership coach, Ben Wolk, has dedicated his professional career to strengthening each of the organizations he's a part of, specifically by helping introverts identify their strengths to become better leaders. Next slide, please. So before we can talk about how to establish a positive workplace culture, we first have to talk about what a positive workplace culture would actually look like. To have thriving employees, people should feel like they belong within their company, as opposed to simply feeling like they can force themselves to fit in. In order to truly belong in a workplace, a person should be able to bring their authentic self to work as much as appropriate and be embraced in that way. In addition to establishing a general feeling of belonging with employees, a workplace culture should ideally be responsible for three main things. The first pillar is building safety. Employees should be able to signal a connection to one another to generate the affirmation feelings of belonging. For example, employees should not feel as if they have to hide a part of themselves within the workplace on a day-to-day basis. A second important pillar is sharing vulnerability. Employees should be able to share vulnerability and be rewarded for it socially. For example, if an employee is struggling with a task, they should be able to reach out to a supervisor or a colleague for help without fear of negative response. This will promote a more collaborative and team-building experience in your workplace instead of a negatively competitive one. Because competition can be positive to an extent, but not if employees feel like they need to be undermining or sabotaging each other's work to benefit their own gain. The third and final pillar that he spoke on was establishing purpose. I'll mention this later further in a slide, but a company should have a shared narrative that aligns with the goals and the values of the collective. I'll explain a little bit more about what he meant by that later. Of course, in a typical workplace, the physical office space is vital to cultivating these three pillars. Nowadays, however, culture must be diffused through intentional, emotional, and virtual proximity, because physical proximity can no longer be relied upon. Next slide, please. So here I'm going to share some strategies that Ben Wolk explained. These strategies take things that might be typical for a virtual workplace and then expands on them to see how they can assist you in promoting a positive company culture. And a lot of this language was geared as like executive to employees, but it can also be implemented like on an employee to employee basis. The first thing he discussed was Zoom. He recommends keeping your camera on in Zoom meetings and potentially even requiring it. Keeping cameras on builds and demonstrates trust. It's hard to connect with blank screens, but by keeping cameras on, it's closer to imitating face-to-face conversations. By keeping your camera on, you're showing others that you trust them and you're encouraging them to trust you as a person and not just a name on a screen. Another Zoom strategy is opening meetings early to simulate hallway conversations. In a physical workplace, of course, people are able to casually talk outside of required meeting times. You would bump into someone on your way to a meeting or see someone in like a desk next to you. Opening Zoom meetings he recommended 10 minutes or so early without a really structured agenda allows people to simulate these conversations virtually, which we sort of did here today with our preliminary chats. The final Zoom tip that he had was allowing people to work in breakout rooms to connect with their immediate teams. It's intimidating for people to talk in a whole company meeting of 50 people, but it's less stressful to talk in a 10-person group of peers. Of course, while some information needs to be relayed on a whole company basis, allowing time for people to break into groups with their specific teams facilitates connection and collaboration. The next tool that he discussed was Slack. Of course, Slack is used professionally to relay information, but allowing employees to add channels relating to their interests can help cultivate a positive company culture. In a workplace, employees may be able to naturally find things in common, so allowing people to make channels for hobbies such as knitting, baseball, or a movie club would allow them to connect with one another online the way that they could in person more naturally. Storytelling kind of relates to what I was saying earlier about establishing a narrative. It's important to tell personal stories about how your work helped others. It allows employees and executives simultaneously to remember why your work is important. Encouraging people to believe in the messaging behind the work instead of the work facilitates better work and encourages people to enjoy their work and do a better job overall. I think a very clear example of this would be in a hospital setting. So if you work in a healthcare professional, specifically a hospital, ensuring that every staff member believes that their work is directly contributing to saving lives helps everyone tell a collective story to themselves, their customers, and to each other. Finally, he recommended establishing a mentoring program between senior employees and more new ones. This would allow more new employees to kind of have a direct connection to the company and a personal one-on-one relationship. That being said, Ben Wolk warned against power imbalances in these relationships. So the mentoring program should be something that is more casual and made to benefit employees and not a situation where it's like, oh, if you don't like your mentor, you'll automatically be fired or be given less opportunities. So that was a very important clarification. So these were just some culture building strategies that he mentioned with Zoom. He also mentioned some others in the presentation, but these were some main ones that he wanted to share about how to kind of change tools that are already in existence to cultivating a more positive company culture. Next slide, please. In summary, his main point of his presentation was about how while things are more difficult to make positive company cultures in a virtual world, it's not impossible. A positive company culture can persist into our digital age, but it must be done with more intention. It's no longer enough to encourage a positive culture with words and assume that the intended results will naturally accumulate. Now these words must be affirmed through more conscious and intentional action. While creating and maintaining a positive company culture is more difficult digitally, as human beings are social creatures who are used to face-to-face interaction, it's more than worth it to ensure that every employee in a company feels like they belong. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. A round of virtual applause. And a round of virtual applause for all of our presenters who took the time to go to Summit, take notes, pay attention, gather slides, create these, and recap it for all of us. So thank you to each of you who took the time to do that, to share with the rest of the community. So I wanted to open up in case anyone had any questions for any of our presenters or anything they missed along in the chat. be about presentation specifically or summit? Well, then first, I guess I'll ask for any of our panelists. So you each picked one presentation, which I know everyone attended multiple. Did any of you have sort of like a runner-up, another presentation that you would have considered recapping?
For me, it was for sure the ChatGPT one. I think it was one of the ones that ended up getting duplicates. I attended it as a volunteer, but then ended up volunteering for the duplicate and going again because I liked it so much.
Was that Pam's?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that was really good. It was one of those sessions that would be hard to recap because there were some slides, but primarily she was like, all right, we're doing it live. Question from the audience. How do you do this? Who does that? Show of hands. It was really dynamic. And she kept saying things like, everything I'm telling you now is going to be out of date in 2 weeks, which was definitely something you don't usually hear in a presentation. Dominic, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so the other one I might have done was, I don't remember the exact name, and I don't have the
Well,
list
that's
of.
okay. You could describe it to us.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I don't have the list in front of me, but it's the one done by Elisa Bonsignore, and she did a panel on how much data affects the environment, mostly in terms of how much the data we consume every day consumes energy and contributes to global warming. I did take some notes on that, like data is simply energy, which means carbon emissions. She presented some really interesting metrics, how much is consumed per unit of data. She had a carbon calculator. We've consumed more data than ever before today, and that contributes to a ton of global emissions. I thought that was interesting.
I know a lot of her work is in like sustainability and ethics, right? In the work that we do in technology. So I missed that one, but she's a really good presenter. Chantal?
Yeah, it was the very first presentation that I went to, but it was how to interview SMEs effectively. I forget who presented it, but it was a lot of good stuff. And it was definitely a very hard to decide between inclusive tech editing and that one. So both really good.
So because I have like to gather presentations, I have a link here I'm sharing with all of you. It's a Google Drive folder, which is a copy of all of the presentation slides. I got copies of at Summit. So either from the presenters directly or from Slack. So I know you got the recap here from our presenters, but also if you want to see some slides or see what some of the other presentations were, some of them also provided handouts. They are all in there. That's not every presentation that was at Summit, but it's everyone that I got a copy of. So if you'd like to poke around and see, I think I had Pam's slides in there as well that Delaney mentioned, which was also one of my runner presentations, but I didn't know how I would recap it because it was so dynamic going in person. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else had anything stand out Summit memory?
One presentation I liked a lot was on personal branding by Susan Kelly. She talked about how personal branding played a role in her career journey as a woman in tech, and how she kind of developed the skills and how she kind of overcame like things that she didn't know but also played into her strengths. She talked about how during job interviews, she had the writing skills, she had the technical writing background, but say she wanted to get into something in, say, like a STEM field, which she didn't know about, and she would tell interviewers, hey, I might not know much about this field exactly, but if you tell me what I need to know, I'll make sure that your documentation is spotless. And I just found that to be, yeah, she had a lot of really good advice on how to kind of like advocate for yourself in the workforce and the interview process, and kind of like how to build up a network and even like a name for yourself in the industry. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one.
And that's why we have the Johntourage, right? Like that's part of your first step in your personal branding, John. I know we're trying to make this happen. John has not encouraged this.
I'm like, oop. I will never mention that to her. She's gonna be like, What are you talking about?
Like my brand.
Yeah, my brand.
No, thanks for sharing that, John. So yeah, I saw that we have some thanks for sharing the slides. A lot of them were really good. The ChatGPT one, there are actually a couple on ChatGPT that were standing room only, and like Delaney mentioned, they end up offering them again and scheduling them in additional slots because people had missed them. I would say that was probably like the hot topic of Summit this past year. I did go to one on how to build a taxonomy, a Star Wars journey, which it was really good for Amanda Patterson. It was a fun presentation where she just walked through everything she did to build out a taxonomy, which is something I'm really into. I like classifying information, so it was a very specific overlap of interests for me, and she ended up giving that one a couple times too. So the slides for that are in the folder if that interests you. So any questions for our presenters? If not, I might turn it back on our attendees. Now that you've seen some of these presentations recapped, does it encourage you to potentially attend Summit in the future, or at least spark your interest?
Most definitely.
Joy's like, yes,
Yeah.
sign me up. Next year, I'm ready. We'll just find out what city it's going to be in. Since it was in Atlanta this year, it was much closer for us, but I don't know what the next location will be for Summit. It's been in like Chicago, Denver. I think it's been a while since it was in California. It was in Orlando in, oh no, I usually would ask Alex what year, but he's not here. Maybe WC remember. It's like 2018, something like that. We had it in Orlando.
I think it might have been 2018 or 2019 because I know I was still a student.
Okay, so we've narrowed it down. It was definitely pre-pandemic.
Yes.
Before everything changed. All right. Well, I will just want to say thank you to everyone who's been sharing things in the chat and asking questions along the way. And again, thank you to each of our presenters. Just the last thing before we wrap up, I was encouraged to set up an anonymous feedback form. So if you would like to give your feedback on STC Florida, I guess me personally, if you have grievances or want to help me build my personal brand or anything like that, I have a link to a anonymous survey you can fill out. There's no obligation to do so. It's anonymous, so I can't even give you credit if you do it. But if you just would like to share anything or a suggestion or anything like that, you are welcome to. If you want to reach out to me personally, you always can. Just proposing the Bethany Bunch. That sounds like the Brady Bunch, though. Like everyone's part of my family.
We gotta have a catch on.
That's all right. I did actually text John earlier in a group chat with my family members. So John is part of my family. No.
Well, you did kidnap him. I mean,
I did kidnap him. Yes, yeah. And
no
Julia
wonder
and I
your bunch is getting bigger. You just keep stealing people.
it's
the
not
method.
quite a cult. Yes, we're all about acquisition and growth in our community building here. But no, if you have anything you want to share, and again, welcome to reach out to me, or you can reach out to our administrative council. We have an email address where you can send something to all of us, suggestions, ideas, branding tips, anything like that. We're happy to hear from you. Jessica has raised her hand.
I didn't want to take us off the track because I was, when you were asking, does anybody have any feedback or questions? I kind of did, but I couldn't quite formulate the question. And I realized that's because I don't know. And I was thinking when you're talking about building community virtually, right? Because that's wasn't so hard at the beginning of the pandemic, but it's gotten harder over time, which is odd. But that whole thing about having your cameras on and off, I mean, it's become this kind of thing where, I thought one thing that she said in the presentation was that something about trust, like it was the opposite of how it's been going, how I've experienced it, because sometimes people want your cameras on because they don't trust you.
Make sure you're there, make sure you're paying attention, make sure you're working.
Right. And it was interesting because we've all, we've always had I've had the running joke with, some of us are not always camera ready. And that's the greatest thing about working from home. And I've had to ask a few times, like, are we expected to have our cameras on? Because I look terrible right now. You know what I mean? And it's just strange. It's a strange sort of, and that makes me not comfortable. And it's just a weird dynamic now. So that was one of the things that struck me in the presentations, because it's this huge awkward moment where I've got, my laptop on. I'm like, oh my God, we're going to be and then I don't even know what my hair looks like,
I think probably it's great for getting to see other people, but it unfortunately means we also see ourselves, right? So it makes us much more conscious of, I've learned things about my own facial expressions that I never knew before I started being on virtual calls for 4 hours a day, every day. So perhaps it's revealing things that we did not expect to learn about how we present ourselves. Kate has a hand raised.
And I have some meetings where it's required. And what was so funny is like, we keep having connection issues. And I just want to say, I know I'm not in charge of this meeting, but if everybody shuts their camera off, we won't
You
keep
feel like
having
we can
connection
rise
issues.
up.
Yeah, because people keep popping in and out, but you could tell they don't have the bandwidth. So it's just such a strange, like, I'm like, it's almost like forced fun, right? It's never fun. And so I know you're trying to foster a team thing, but you're just making it worse. So I don't know.
No, I can
Interesting.
understand. My previous job, all audio, didn't do video really ever. So now I'm on
Right.
video all the time. Kate?
It's true. I struggle with similar things, both from an online student perspective and also as an online worker perspective, because, we're switching from Slack to Teams, and Teams will, if you're the first person to click on it, then it tells everyone that you started the meeting. And then it's like, is it cameras on or is it cameras off? I don't want to be the first one and get it wrong. Or school is the same way. The professor winds up being the only one with their camera on, which I feel bad about, but not bad enough to be the only student to turn my camera on. Or even today, I logged on and everyone had their blazers on. I was like, whoops, well, oh well.
It's because I used to get to wear blazers in an office, and I don't do that so much anymore, so it's their chance to shine. But yeah, thank you guys for sharing. We've got a couple minutes, so I just want to make sure any other questions or anything anyone wanted to give feedback on the presentations. Okay, then I think we'll wrap up, but if anyone wants to stay on after the recording, I have one last video related Polish story to share of one of the most awkward minutes of my entire life. So if that sounds good to you, I am going to wrap up the meeting and then I will share that afterwards. So thank you everyone so much for joining for our STC Florida chapter meeting. It was great to see your faces, hear your voices, see your chats, however you chose to engage with us. We're glad you're here, and I hopefully will see you in the coming weeks or months. So take care. And then I need to remember how to stop the recording.